So we have with us today Mick West, British American science writer, skeptical investigator, and retired video game programmer. So, which I didn't know until reading your profile. But for our purposes, Mick is most well known for producing investigations into UFO phenomenon or UAPs, whatever your preferred terminology is. Sometimes described as a debunker, but I think not hugely in favor of that terminology. But yes, you may have seen Mick on various shows whenever people are discussing new footage of UFOs, and there's been a relative bevy in the past couple of years. And we thought it would be good to have Mick on to talk about some of the recent news stories around aliens and UFOs, but also more broadly about his experiences dealing with investigations into UFOs and the UFO advocacy community. I don't know their preferred terminology, but
alien rights now.
yeah, that's the alien rights activists. But Mick, is there anything I'm missing significantly from your bio there?
Well, I'm not just a UFO investigator. I do a lot of different investigations of a variety of conspiracy theories. I just happen to be doing a lot of UFO stuff at the moment. But my background has kind of started with investigating the chemtrails conspiracy theory and then moving on to a variety of other conspiracy theories like 9/11 and people who think the Earth is flat and election fraud. Vaccine denial, things like that. So a whole bunch of different things. I even wrote a book about it, which I shall plug shamelessly here, which is called Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect. And I do have debunking on the front of the book, but like you say, I try to stay away from that term now, because when I got into UFO investigating, I discovered that debunking is kind of like almost like a curse word to UFO people. And I didn't realize this. It was this very strong distinction that was made in the community between debunkers on the one side, who are evil tools of the government, and skeptics on the other side, who are just good-natured folk who like looking into things. So I'm actually a skeptic, because I am a good-natured guy who likes looking into things, and the government isn't paying me anything, so I stay away from debunker. But yeah, it's all good. That's what I do. I look into UFOs.
A rose by any other name, right? It's interesting that they place so much emphasis on that. I think it's fine to take the approach of debunking when you're talking about the Twin Towers or chemtrails and things like that. But it was interesting to. We're not going to talk about that your recent discussion with Eric Weinstein, but it was interesting to see how focused he was on that.
Yeah. I think investigator sums things up a lot better, because I investigate UFOs. I don't set out to debunk. Like if someone sends me a video of a light in the sky, I mean, I can't debunk it. I can't say that's not a light in the sky. I'm just trying to figure out what the light actually is. And quite often I succeed, but sometimes I fail.
And Mick, you outlined quite a long-term interest in a whole bunch of different aspects of conspiracy theorist communities, or various controversial topics. And I'm just curious then. So, how long have you been involved in skepticism and investigation, and how this isn't your main activity? So is this like a very involved hobby, or how do you frame your kind of investigation work?
Well, it is a very involved hobby, and I'm actually retired from the video game industry now. So this is my main interest, I guess. I mean, I do other things as well, but I do this, and I enjoy it as a hobby. I think it's very interesting, and I have fun and learn new things and discover new things. But I've been doing it since I guess around the mid 2000s. I set up my first website, Contrail Science, I think in 2006, which is getting back a bit. There's a bunch of people who weren't even born back then, and I set up Metabunk, which is my bigger forum, in 2010. So that by itself is like 13 years old. So I've been doing it a while, and I think the UFO thing kind of stepped up in importance and interest in the last few years as it became much more of a public interest thing, and we got these kind of interesting UFO videos from the government to analyze. So I started that in earnest, I guess, around 2018 would be like when I really started getting into it.
Yeah. So I think for most listeners like me, the recent stuff that was in the news, well, semi-recent now, was those recordings. I think U.S. Air Force pilots sighting and apparently interesting, fast-moving objects recorded on gimbaled cameras. Generally, do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, well, those were the ones that came out in 2017, 2018, and there was 3 videos. One was called FLIR 1, one was called Gimbal, and one was called Go Fast. And they're a bit long in the tooth now, really. They've kind of been superseded by others, but they're still there as the iconic poster boys of UFOs. Like if you tune into a program about UFOs, you will very often see the gimbal video in the background because it looks like a flying saucer. But that was one that I spent some time analyzing. Now, all these videos, they're taken with infrared cameras. So they're all just showing the heat that comes off things rather than the actual light. And some of them were even taken at night, so they wouldn't be able to see anything anyway. But, one of them, the gimbal video, it looks like a flying saucer zipping over the top of the clouds. But I did quite a lot of analysis on that over probably like a year or two, and it eventually ended up building a fairly detailed simulation of what was going on, and kind of determined that what we're seeing wasn't actually a flying saucer, but was actually the infrared glare of something that obscured what was behind it. Like if you look at the sun, you're not really seeing the sun, you're seeing just a big glare around the sun. Or if you look at a flashlight, you often can't see the person behind it because it's obscured by this glare. And the rotation of this object, turns out it matched exactly the rotation that was required to do the movements that you could see by looking at the numbers on the screen. So it is some like fairly technical analysis, but I think that's been fairly conclusively shown that it's not actually a rotating object, it is actually a rotating glare, but we don't know exactly what's behind the glare. So there's still the possibility that it's a hot flying saucer that's doing this, or it could be that we're looking at the tail end of an FA-18 that's flying away from the camera. And, different people prefer different explanations.
One of them seems slightly more likely, but that's perhaps my bias. But Mick, I'm curious. So, 2 things that struck me there is one, just this is me editorializing, but the fact that you would spend, a year or upwards on a particular video, it does counter the sort of image of you or other people that investigate this being glibly dismissive of things. But related to that is, I'm just curious, your expertise for things like looking at the potential mechanics of the camera that might explain the feature. Like, why do you know that? I know you have some experience training as a pilot, but is it from that, or is it from your programming background, or just your interest in the topic?
It's really mostly from my programming background. I know how to fly a plane. I took flying lessons to fly a plane. I know how to use a camera and take videos and stuff. So I've had like nice cameras. I've got a big shelf full of cameras behind me since I was quite young. But really, it's to do with the math behind what you need when you're making a 3D game. And in a 3D game, you essentially have a virtual camera. Often you have multiple different cameras. But when you're playing a game, like say a skateboarding game, you have a virtual camera that's following the skateboarder. And then sometimes when you bail, you might cut to another camera, and then you would show it from a different angle. So when you're programming it, you actually have to program what does it take to take this 3D scene and take an imaginary camera and then create the image on screen, this 2-dimensional picture of what the camera is looking at, And then how does that work in terms of animation? How does the camera move? How do the objects move? And what does that look like? So the math that's required for that, it's not super complicated. It's not like PhD in physics, but you're taking like a 3-dimensional position and in the world, and then you're transforming it into a point on the screen. Then you take another one, take that to a point on the screen. So if you can do that, then if you've got a video of a UFO with the UFOs moving around the screen, you can take those 2D points and you can say, where might that be in the 3D world? So you basically take the math and you do it backwards. Now, you can't do it perfectly because you lose information when you go from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions. So you've got to kind of use other clues in the scene to try to figure out how far away the object is, which is kind of the missing third dimension. And then you can do all kinds of analysis on it. And I did, when I was doing video games, I actually did a skateboarding game called Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. We used very simple physics in that. It was, you're skating along and you're moving over a surface, or you're flying through the air, you jump and you have to fly through the air. The physics of that is just simple Newtonian mechanics. There's very simple equations of motion. And that's all you need. I mean, you don't need anything complicated. It's not like you're doing planetary orbits or anything like that. So you can use the same math again that I used for like doing a skateboarding game in reverse and figure out how is this object moving in 3 dimensions? How might it be moving? How fast is it going? How big is it? What's the acceleration? All these things are, determinable from the video. And that's what you do to try to figure out what's going on. If you figure that stuff out, you can see what's possible. Like, is it a plane that's far away, or is it like an insect that's flying along that's very close to the camera? Is it something like a reflection or something like that? Knowing all the math and what's actually going on in the cameras helps you determine that.
So that's it's fascinating to think about the influence of Tony Hawk's on analyzing potential UFO videos. That's I think few conspiracy theorists have that in their like model of potential motivations. But so an interesting thing, Mick, from the videos that have come out over the past couple of years, I think there's a common narrative now that the government kind of silencing or censorship has been broken to some extent, and that now we're beginning to see at least the tip of the iceberg of the material that they've collected over the decades and censored, right? And a lot of the figures that we cover in the kind of guru space, that's their preferred narrative, right? That it's really quite naive if you are skeptical after what's already revealed and what more is promised to be delivered. But I'm wondering, from the deep dive that you've done into the material that's been released, how you would characterize what's come out over the past couple of years with these releases.
It's not very compelling in terms of making the case that these are alien spaceships or even any kind of advanced technology. There's really nothing in any of the videos that unambiguously demonstrates anything anomalous. And there's a lot of the videos that come out, not just these 3 older videos, but some of the newer videos that initially people say this is the best UFO video of all time. And then when you do a bit of analysis of it, it just shows nothing. And that's true for things that were leaked. So there was a famous green triangle video that came out like 2 or 3 years ago. And the guy who released that, Jeremy Corbell, was saying, this is the best government-sourced UFO video of all time. And this was the big headline at the time. And like 10 minutes after he released the video, I pointed out what it actually was, which was these green triangles, which was just a camera artifact. And everyone's like, no, Mick, that can't be right. Jeremy Corbell said it was like a flying pyramid. And Corbell says that people on the ship said it was a flying pyramid. And he had all these witnesses saying it was a flying pyramid. But then I matched up the video to a star map. You could see, this triangle here is this star, this triangle is this star, and all these triangles match stars. There's one triangle that's flying along, and it's flashing, and the flashing of the lights is pretty much identical to the navigation lights of a 737. So instead of it being like a video of like, amazing flying UFOs that are pyramid shaped, it turned out to be a video of some stars and a plane flying over. And this type of thing is kind of indicative of a lot of things. Like one is the claims people make, but also people in the military make mistakes. This video, I did the analysis, but like about a year later, there was a congressional hearing where they showed the same video and then they explained essentially that my analysis was correct. They didn't mention me or anything, but they said like, that this is a camera artifact. They didn't say they were stars. They hadn't even got to that bit yet. They're doing that now. They said recently that they're going to look at some star maps and they're going to try to like fully close this case. But I figured it out 2 years ago. But they also released some new videos at the time, and two of the videos they released had audio. And the audio was the guy who was called the Snoopy team leader, which sounds like a silly name. But Snoopy stands for like, I don't know, like systems, operations, I don't know, integration or some acronym. But it's basically the people who are tasked with taking video and photos of things that approach the ship. So they stand on the bow or the railings, and they have their really big cameras or the night vision, and they take video of things. So this guy's talking about what he's looking at, and he's saying Snoopy team leader, blah 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 blah. I'm at this location, this time, this this angle, this speed, looking at 3 unidentified aerial systems, which is military speak for drones, essentially. And they're showing this video, and there's these 3 things, these 3 triangles in the sky. But those 3 triangles, they weren't drones. They were stars. There weren't even any flashing lights in this one. It was just 3 stars that he was looking at. And this happened twice. These are 2 different videos. The exact same thing. Like the guy's like, USS Russell looking at the bow. This is like unidentified aerial system, which is, I think he said like 400 feet off the bow. And it was the star, I can't remember what it was, a Capella, I think. So it's a known star. Only he said it was flashing red, green, and white, which is the colors that the Capella flashes. It's one of those stars that twinkles in different colors. So military people make mistakes, and this has been revealed over and over again. They released a video of what they said was a drone in infrared, but it was actually a plane. And they haven't even owned up to that one yet. It's obviously a plane. Anyone can see it's a plane. But there's this kind of, I don't know, there's this thread of mistakes running through all of this UFO stuff coming from the government.
Mm. And I guess it shouldn't be surprising, should it? I mean, the atmosphere and even the ocean is visually speaking an inherently ambiguous place, and people, and it is unlike sort of normal objects that are maybe closer to us and you might encounter in everyday life. Things are often like ungrounded. So it seems like it should be quite easy for people to make to make errors when assessing things they see.
Sure, but like when you're what they call the trained observer, this is something that's very big in the UFO community. They say like this was observed by trained observers, and here we have examples of someone who not just pilots who are trained to fly a plane and look for other things. They're not really trained to observe things. These are people whose only job is to observe. They're trained observers of things coming towards the ship, and they were mistaking stars for drones. I mean, it's pretty bad. And people are reporting things on video. Like these triangles like went up the chain of command, and people were investigating it. And it wasn't they said it was a year later that they figured out that these triangles were actually just artifacts of the camera. I mean, like they've had this video, and it's like there's these bizarre triangles swarming the ship. I said, no. There are artifacts of the camera, and they're actually stars, which is, I'm sure they'll release a little report on that. I think it's coming in August or something, but they might push it till next year. But they'll eventually admit that these things are stars. But yeah, it's not a good look, and even the more recent videos, they're showing videos now saying, "Look, we've solved this case." and they show a video, and it's like 3 dots moving around on the screen, and you can tell obviously it's just the cameras moving around that's making these dots move around. And they were saying this is something that we all thought was anomalous at the start. The pilots couldn't figure out what it was. They tried to catch up with these 3 dots, but they couldn't catch up with them. And it was just 3 planes off in the distance, and it was moving around because the camera was moving around. They couldn't catch it up because it was 100 miles away. And there's more. I mean, I could keep going, but you get the idea here. It's what's going on.
The interesting thing there is a little bit that I find it fascinating with the UFO community that they have a kind of selective charity which they apply, whereby eyewitness accounts, like you said, trained pilots or whatever that have accounts of observing, a UFO, are treated as if, to disagree or to at least to propose alternative explanations for what they observed is like insulting of
Oh
their
yeah,
expertise. But on the other hand, they're very clear that you should always be skeptical of everything that the government says and does. So it's like there's a hyper skepticism towards any narrative that contradicts or says, that they investigated UFOs and they didn't find enough evidence to find it credible. And then on the other hand, there's like a hyper charity or credibility extended to eyewitness testimony. And it's interesting because it's often in the same conversation, it's sometimes in the same paragraph, that like both of those approaches are deployed. It must be frustrating to
yeah.
deal with.
Yeah, it's kind of understandable, though, that you would treat two things differently. One is kind of an organization doing things, and the other one is an individual doing things, just speaking for themselves. So if you think like a government spokesperson saying we don't know anything about UFOs, it's very different to a pilot saying I saw a UFO once. So you think the government spokesperson is doing their job. Pilots, their job isn't to lie to people about seeing UFOs. So I think it's kind of understandable that you would get that. But there is this kind of a veneration for pilots and military pilots in particular. And if I say things about pilots, not about them, but just to question their accounts, it's viewed sometimes as a grave insult that I really should apologize for. But all I'm doing is saying, well, maybe he was a bit mistaken in judging the size of this object or the distance away that this object is. And that's basically all I'm saying, that pilots are humans. They can make mistakes. And pilots do make mistakes. Like I've been talking about the other mistakes. Pilots themselves, they're not immune to mistakes. Sometimes pilots fly into the ground because they misjudged how high they were off the ground. This is something that happens. There's a famous UFO pilot, Commander David Fravor. He didn't fly into the ground. He's a great pilot, but he says that when he was engaging with this Tic Tac object, this supposed Tic Tac object, he very deliberately flew down very slowly, and he explains why he does this. He's explained this several times. He says, the sky, the sea looks the same from 2,000 feet as it does from 8,000 feet. So if you're not careful, you'll misjudge your altitude and you'll fly into the ocean. So you should descend towards the ocean surface slowly. So he's admitting there that pilots make mistakes, and you have to be careful and you have to be aware of these mistakes. And yet we're also meant to take everything that he says about the observations of a Tic Tac object that he's never seen before as being like the word of law, like written in stone. It must have happened exactly like that, when it probably didn't.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most frustrating things about that discourse, which the immense amount of credulity, I guess, that is given to eyewitness accounts. My background is in psychology, which is basically the study of human fallibility, how our memories are often reconstructed and hazy, and we make mistakes with that. We make mistakes in what we see, and we often bring a huge amount of expectations, informed by our culture or our personal psychology into what we think we see. So I find the discourse kind of frustrating, which is that it's like, I feel like I feel like the general public should know this, or does know this, that humans are fallible. Yet it's not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't though. I mean, that's the thing. Like you think that you know all this stuff. You've probably read all the books. You're familiar with like false memories, like Elizabeth Loftus and things like that. And you know about culture bound things where like different cultures see things in different ways. But the general public, they think memory is like a video recorder, and if I see something and I later play it back in my mind, then that's what happens. When, like you say, memories are constructed, and when they're reconstructed later, they can change and things get added to them. I mean, I see this all this time myself in my own memories. Like you have a memory of doing something, and one detail of that gets removed and replaced with something else. Like it becomes a different person. You think, oh, I was talking to this person, and then I was talking to this person then, or it was at this event, when it's actually at a completely different event. And if we ourselves can have these memories change like that, I think people trying to recall some kind of UFO encounter from years ago can certainly do that. And people think that there are certain memories called flashbulb memories. Bit of an old-fashioned term, but it's like the camera flash going off freezes the action, and then you remember things exactly what it was, like really dramatic things, like where were you when you heard about 9/11? A lot of people will say that they can remember that exactly, and I think I can. I'm pretty, 99% sure that I can. But they've done studies on this, and people's stories change over the years. Like they had a large cohort of people, and they asked them, describe your feelings and what was going on at the time. And then they came back to them, like a year later, or maybe 5 years later, or something like that, and asked them again. And I don't know, it's completely changed, but a lot of them changed very significant details. So we've got these UFO cases, which in some cases are going back, say maybe just 5 years, but that's still quite a lot. Some of them are going back 10, 15 years, and some of them even further than that. And we're asking whoever the observer is to remember. So what you're going to get isn't going to be what happened.
I really feel like somebody should tell Eric Weinstein this, but unfortunately,
he's not available for it.
He's not available,
podcast,
unfortunately.
sadly. But, yeah,
You asked him?
and Mick, the point that you make is good, and I think one that I would completely agree with. That it is right to be skeptical of like government spokespeople, and there's been plenty of occasions where they've denied programs exist, which subsequently have been proven to exist, whether or not they actually reveal anything useful. But I guess the two things that stick out to me when it comes to the level of charity and where it's unequally distributed is you're just a guy, right? You're not the head of some. It's sometimes presented as, but like the skeptics community is not exactly like a huge powerful block, right? It's in large respects it is a lot of individuals around some organizations, but not hugely well funded or that kind of thing.
Oh no,
but there is there isn't a lot of charity in my experience extended towards the skeptics that are engaging with that content. And similarly, the case, you've detailed a couple of examples where the government is clearly, it's not that people don't have expertise, it's just that they might not have particular expertise in identifying artifacts in videos or that kind of thing. Yet a lot of people respond, why would you make you're not a professional pilot in the government, so how come you can identify these things that these people with trained expertise and projects dedicated to it don't get it? So that seems to be attributing like a hyper competency to the government when it's convenient.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I would just ask people to look at the track records of the people involved. Like, what cases have they solved? Like, I've solved a bunch of cases. And what cases did they mess up? Like, and some of these people have messed up cases, like the Green Triangle case, for example, and other cases. So it's it's very easy to kind of say, like, why should we trust you when a large body of experts or whatever says something else, or even just one expert. But I come back often to this one case. There was the Chilean Navy case from 2016, which was a story by Leslie Keane, who was one of the reporters on the New York Times thing, and more recently on this whistleblower thing. And she released this video of a UFO that the Chilean military had been investigating for 2 years. The Chilean military has a UFO investigation body, like a kind of a UAP task force in Chile, and they'd been looking into this for 2 years. And they had a general, like a brigadier general, I think, like in charge of the whole group, a whole bunch of scientists, a bunch of like pilots and researchers, and lots of resources. And they looked into everything possible, and interviewed people, and did all kinds of research and tried to figure out what it was. And they couldn't do it. It took them 2 years. Then they released the video. Leslie Keane wrote a big story about how amazing it was and how it's going to change ufology forever. And then me and the guys at Metabunk like solved it in I believe like 3 days. It took us to find what it actually was, and then a few more days just to prove it conclusively by making 3D models of what was going on. So credentials don't mean anything. Results mean something. I've solved loads and loads and loads of UFO cases. How many UFO cases have these other people solved? And then weigh that one against the other. Don't be like, this guy's got a PhD. Mick doesn't have a PhD. Therefore, we'll trust the PhD. When this PhD has just done nothing and got a whole bunch of things wrong.
That's I can't help. You're usually, in my experience, Mick, of looking at your interviews, you're very polite about it, but I find some of this frustrating that people are kind of presenting that they're very skeptical of authority, and they don't just automatically trust credentials, but then they do things like that where they'll kind of point to somebody's professional or the fact that they have a doctorate in something as if it means something. And for all the reasons you've said, it's not that expertise is irrelevant, but just that like is absolutely no guarantee of like that a particular outcome or investigation is correct just because somebody with credentials did it.
Yeah, they like people with credentials who are on their side. They don't like people with credentials who are arguing against them because they're obviously government shills. And they don't like authority in the sense of they don't like the government, and they don't like academia, and they don't like science and big money and stuff like that. They prefer individual mavericks who are going against the system. So they like scientists who tend to be a little more maybe eccentric, the scientists who will entertain their ideas and in some cases support their ideas. But yes, they definitely do like the authority of credentials when someone agrees with them.
You're kind of describing one of the main themes of our little podcast there. We definitely agree. But yeah, it is a tricky one, isn't it? And I do have sympathy for people who struggle to allocate the right amount of trust to various sources. And it is complicated because sometimes a government department or scientists working for a government agency of some kind are the right people to trust when it comes to something like vaccines or global warming or something. But it's nuanced, isn't it? Because I doubt that there is a government agency that employs a crack team of UFO investigators. Like there's like like the Liam Neeson quote. It's a very particular set of skills.
It is. But what I do isn't really like, it's not just me. Like I use crowdsourcing quite a lot, and there's a bunch of people on Metabunk, and it's not. I don't just sit in my room and figure it out. I post something onto Metabunk. Other people will look at it and suggest other things, or they'll come up with things themselves, and I'll look at what they did, and then we'll go on. Like I'll say, like, I don't know what this is, and someone will go off and spend hours and hours researching it and find out, what this thing is in a photo, or where a particular location is, like geolocating things, or looking at the weather on a particular day. So, like, having a team is good, but it's it's kind of also in a way misleading, like that Chilean Navy thing, like having a team of experts. You really want you more than just a team of experts. You really want to have it kind of open to everybody. And the investigations I do are mostly kind of just in open threads on Metabunk, where anyone can read them and anyone can comment. But if people are squirreled away working on things, I think it's very easy for them to go down the wrong path, maybe eliminate something. That's what happened with the Chilean thing. They eliminated the possibility of this UFO being a plane, and they had like 5 different reasons as to why they'd eliminated it. Like, it wasn't showing up on the radar, it wasn't answering like the radio calls, it was dumping some kind of hot liquid out of the back, and it didn't look like a plane, and something else as well. But all these things were actually entirely explainable, but they prematurely eliminated this possibility. And this is kind of what happens if you get these kind of rigid structures, like, we're going to do this, we're going to like figure this out and eliminate it. If it's not that, then we'll move on to the next thing. If you've got a much more free-form thing, a whole bunch of people looking at things, like suggesting things, I make mistakes, people correct my mistakes, they make mistakes, I correct their mistakes, and eventually it all bubbles together and we come up with the answer very rapidly. But so there's definitely a risk in kind of trusting a team of experts.
Yeah. Well, I like the way you framed that, because it does seem like a very positive example of like a citizen science of
Yeah,
crowdsourced enthusiasts focusing on something, and a lot of those principles are like open science academic principles, which is individual academics get it hugely wrong, have their own particular pet theories and insane obsessions. But the whole principle, the way it's meant to work anyway,
yeah,
is that it's self-correcting because we have enough people.
yeah. And with the whole like peer review system, obviously, like that's supposed to be like the gate you've got to get past, and then other people will read it, and then they'll respond to it, and they'll replicate things. It's very, very slow, though. It's not like a very fast process.
Yeah.
If you want to figure out what's in a video, you can't just like say, well, I'll put a paper out and get it peer reviewed, and then see what happens, and see if people agree with my hypothesis, and then we'll publish it, and a couple of months later maybe someone else will come up with something. No, like, I'm doing it in this live thread. I post something, and like 10 minutes later someone says, Mick, your math is wrong. It's like,
Yeah.
it's not typical academic science, but it's rapid iteration of an investigation that uses essentially scientific principles and engineering principles and just general investigation principles to hone in on the solution very rapidly.
Again, this is me giving a bit of an editorial, but I think the way you describe it, it could be extraordinarily healthy when the motivations are sort of correct. I don't like to use that
Yeah,
word, but obviously you see heaps of examples of conspiratorially minded people who are also amateur sleuths, amateur
sure.
investigators, and going just further and further down rabbit holes. But the way you described your own motivations, which I suspect applies to a lot of other people in your network at the beginning, which is that it's a hobby like building model trains, and you're interested in the technical aspects. You don't; those are your genuine motivations, and it's not that there's a broader agenda to prove
Yeah,
something true or something else true.
yeah. I mean, that's a big problem. In that a lot of people, they're not investigators; they're advocates. They're
Mm.
trying to prove a certain thing rather than trying to find out what's going on. When I'm looking at a UFO video, I'm trying to find out what that video actually shows. Whereas some people, when they look at a video, they're trying to prove that it's an anomalous video. So they're trying to eke any little ounce of anomaly out of it, and they're ignoring anything that might actually explain it. But they don't want to go down that road. They want to go towards the light. They want to find out, is this an anomalous UFO? They don't really care to solve it. I mean, they would, but they have this kind of bias towards a certain explanation, and a lot of people are not even investigating; they're just advocating. They're saying this is obviously an anomalous thing. This guy told me that this is anomalous, and this guy's one of us. I'm going to trust him. and so they just end up advocating. But over on Metabunk, hopefully all that we're doing is trying to find out what things actually are, and if something was an alien and I discovered it was an alien, that would be awesome. So I'm not against that idea. It would be wonderful if that's what bubbled to the surface. This thing actually is going at 500 G. But it doesn't actually
We'll have you
work out
back,
that way.
Mick, if you
we'll have
find
you
that.
back if that happens. Well, motivated reasoning, as they say, is a hell of
Indeed.
a drug. But where I'm sympathetic for people who might trust the wrong people or be misled is that, like, everybody says that they're doing dispassionate investigation. Everybody claims to be doing that, and it takes, I think you'd agree, a little bit of, I don't know, street smarts or social intelligence or something to tell the difference. And even then, if you're good at it, you might be wrong.
Yeah, no, it's I'm sure I have some biases. I when I go into an investigation, I've looked at so many things already, and they all turn out to either be not enough information or some kind of mundane explanation. And so when I look at something, I guess I kind of automatically think, oh, that looks like a reflection of a light in the window, and that would be the first explanation I would check out. I wouldn't automatically think, oh, that looks like a flying saucer. So the priorities of my investigations are perhaps a little bit different, but I'm still just trying to figure things out. So if I think this is a light reflecting in the window, then I've got to investigate that. Like, are they inside? Are they outside? Was there a light in the room that would do that? And what are the various settings on the camera? Things like that. So you still kind of eliminate it. If you're saying maybe it's a flying saucer, then it's a little harder to do anything with, because you can't actually kind of prove something's a flying saucer just from a photograph. So it's kind of an asymmetric kind of investigation in a way. You do end up kind of just eliminating things, because the thing is, like, about UFOs is there's never something that's unambiguously anomalous, and that's what you want. Even if you can't figure out what it is, you don't get something that has no other explanation. There's always potential explanations for these things, and this is something that ufology lacks. Kind of this black swan event of, say, two people taking a video of a silver orb in the sky from known locations, and the orb goes zip 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 with 100 Gs of acceleration. And that would be it. That would demonstrate unequivocally, if these people are to be trusted, that something anomalous was happening. But we never get anything that even approaches that very simple level of evidence. We just get a white dot moving around in the distance. Could be anything. Could be a bird. Could be a plane. Or we get these fuzzy blobs on the Navy videos, or we get eyewitness accounts of things that you can't verify.
Chris wants to pivot to another interesting topic, but just before we do, I have a very personal, just curiosity. I'd like to ask. I mean, because one exception to that, these ambiguous fuzzy dots in the distance, is the totally fabricated videos, which I've seen. The technology these days for doing stuff.
Yeah.
Whatever the software is,
Oh, yeah.
is very good, and I've seen a bunch of these posted on social media, and I've also read the comments, and it seems as though people, at least some people, take it at face value. I'm just wondering, you must have seen a bit of that. What's going on there?
There's a variety of people in the UFO community, and some of them are much more ready to believe than others. You should, if you want to experience it, just kind of join a few UFO groups, and you'll see there's a variety of different types. Some of them are a bit more nuts and bolts into looking into UFOs, but very, very rapidly, when you start looking into UFO culture, you get towards essentially what's supernatural. People who believe in, a supernatural explanation of things are very credulous about accepting a video at face value. And someone posts a video of something that looks like a face reflecting in the window, and it's obviously just some blobs of light or something. You'll get a whole bunch of people saying, "Yeah, I can see what you're saying," and other people say, "Yeah, I can kind of feel vibrations coming off this picture." And with with UFOs. Like someone posts a fake video, and people, why wouldn't it be real? They accept it. They think that there are beings coming from other dimensions, and that projecting realities, and all kinds of things are going on. So there's always a range of people who are going to view any particular video, and some of them are going to view it a certain way.
The obvious alien autopsy in the room is the recent testimony by David Grush, the
Yeah.
former intelligence officer or some position in the government, who has claimed to much fanfare. This is, so
Oh, yeah.
speaking like about, that people, whether or not they're critical or not, I'm consistently amazed by the coverage of this particular story. But yeah, so in any case, he's alleged that I don't believe he's seen the video. He's just heard that the evidence exists, but people have presented it as very significant that he's been willing to go on the record acknowledging this. And there's articles in the Guardian. It's been discussed by pretty much everyone that I can see online in the
Mm-hmm.
guru sphere. And I'm just curious. I think I know, but in any case, your response to this story and how it's being presented currently.
Well, the claims are pretty amazing, and if they are true, they would change the world in an earth-shattering way for forever. It would be the biggest story in human history. But you'll notice that if you go and look at all the front pages of the media, there's not really any coverage of it. And I think everybody's being pretty cautious about it. There's a few media outlets that are doing stories on it, but it's not like leading stories. And the reason is that he doesn't really have any evidence. This is one guy saying that other people have told him that there is an alien spaceship crash retrieval program. And he's telling a whole bunch of stories that people have told him that he believes to be true, but he doesn't actually know if they're true. He believes them to be true because people have told him. And I think he's seen some documents, but he hasn't even seen any photos. He didn't work in the program, didn't work in the crash retrieval program. And he's not seen any of the spaceships or anything like that. And the story broke on this media site called The Debrief. And originally, they wanted the New York Times to do it. One of the reporters there, Ralph Blumenthal, was an old New York Times reporter, and the other one, Leslie Keane, worked with Ralph Blumenthal, and they did this original story back in 2017 about Lou Elizondo and the whole UFO thing back then. That's when the videos came out. So they actually started the ball rolling. They tried to kind of repeat that. They tried to get the New York Times to do a story on this, which would have been huge. New York Times essentially turned them down because of various demands that they wanted about it. I can't remember exactly what the deal was, but the New York Times said no. They went to, I think, Politico. Then they went to Washington Post. Washington Post needed more time to fact check it. So they didn't have the time for some reason. So they went to this other outlet called The Debrief, which is just kind of like a military, small media outlet, military themed with a UFO thing, UFO overtones. And they just pushed out this article. And initially, this article, they just say, we have this crash retrieval program, we have documents, people have told me this, blah blah blah. Then we get a video of a bits of interview of this guy Dave Grush done by this Australian journalist Ross Coulthart, and he starts saying things that are even more amazing. He says that not only do we have crashed alien spaceships, some of the crashed alien spaceships have bodies in them. Which I thought really should have been the lead. Really should have been the lead thing. We have crashed alien. We have actually alien bodies. But turns out he never talked to Leslie Keane about that. He never talked to the two journalists about that for some reason. And she was like, I don't want to talk about bodies. And if he had told me about bodies, I wouldn't have put them in the story because bodies is too much. So it's almost like she she doesn't believe him on the bodies thing, but she does believe him on the spaceship thing. But she wants to do a spaceship story because she knows that's all true, but the bodies thing is a bit sketchy. And then he does like another interview for like a French newspaper, I think La Parisienne, something like that. And in that, he makes a claim that the US acquired a UFO in 1944, nearly 80 years ago, from Italy. And this UFO landed in Italy in 1933 and was captured by Mussolini's guys and held in a warehouse somewhere for 9 years until towards the end of World War II when the Allies invaded Italy. And they took this UFO back to the States and they started analyzing it. And then they discovered Velcro and Teflon and stuff like that and semiconductors by analyzing this UFO, which is just basically part of UFO mythology.
Yeah.
It's this old story that's been knocking around for a long time, and a lot of people think that it's just a fake story. So it almost seems like, it's not like he's discovered all these secrets. It's like somebody who believes in all the UFO stuff has been talking to someone else, telling them stuff, and then they talk to Dave Grush, and Dave Grush is, oh my God, we got this thing back in 1944. And it's just all of it is essentially UFO mythology. I remember someone tweeted today and they said there's nothing in what Dave Grush has said today that we didn't already know. It's just that he's a trained professional who's coming forward for the first time. He's told us that he was asked, what evidence do you have that these are alien craft? So they've got these alien craft with dead aliens inside them. And so he's asked, what evidence do you have that these are alien craft? He doesn't say like, oh, well, they had aliens inside them. He says like, we did some analysis of the isotope ratio of some metal, and it was an unusual isotope ratio that must have been engineered.
They just ignored the alien body. Let's
go straight to the metal. Aliens sat right there. They're like, what is this weird bit of tinfoil? So it's not the most compelling sounding story to me. It sounds pretty ridiculous. And he has receipts. Apparently other people are going to come forward and corroborate what he's saying. But it just sounds like he's repeating UFO mythology. The isotope ratio thing is like at least 10 years old. I think people have been finding bits of metal and being like, oh, this isn't the right isotope ratio. And then there's another piece of metal. It's this little triangular piece of metal, and it's made of multiple layers of magnesium and bismuth and a bit of zinc. And people are saying like, no human technology can create this. It's a metamaterial. It's a terahertz waveguide. But this is something that I believe it was just sent in to Art Bell, who was this conspiracy theorist radio host like 20 years ago, with this cover letter of this guy saying, my grandfather had these things from his time in the military when he was like a telepathic communicator with the aliens. And I found this in an envelope in the attic, and I'm sending them to you to take care of. And they've been knocking around the UFO community ever since. But it's just a little bit of scrap metal, essentially. Like it's got these weird layers that have probably come from some industrial process, like it was sputtering or something like that, where you coat things and then a bit of the side of the container got coated with something. But these, again, it's just all UFO mythology being repeated in this weird framework of playing telephone, where everyone tells everybody something else and it's all top secret, and you don't know that it was originally just this silly story, and now it's gone through to Dave Grush and now he's telling it to Congress.
We had a slight experience of this through the content that we analyze, looking at the kind of secular guru space, because in particular, there were a couple of other people that mentioned it as well, but the two most prominent were Sam Harris and Eric Weinstein. Indicated that they'd been contacted, I believe, independently by someone, and the person had got their telephone number. This was part of the thing that they find very convincing, and that person promised that they were going to reveal evidence to them about
Mm-hmm.
and this was around the same time as that information was starting to appear in the New York Times and the stories that you just talked about. And Sam Harris talked about it on his podcast. And he seemed quite, he acknowledged that this is, I'm not all in on this. I'm just saying that there's credible people who appear to be contacting me and letting me know that they want me to help break the story. And same with Eric. And Eric indicated that this person had been in contact with him for years.
Mm-hmm.
And in your conversation with Eric and subsequently with Sam, I think Sam ended up like disillusioned and doesn't talk about it anymore. But I find that this kind of narrative that there's evidence that's forthcoming and it's going to be explosive, and that the government or whoever it is wants to release it to like someone like Sam Harris and Eric Weinstein, who, influential
Yeah.
people, but not exactly the, I would imagine the primary sources that we need to release, the existence of UFOs from. So
Well,
I just find that interesting that uh, actually the part that interests me is there is clearly someone involved who is
yeah.
promising the release of information, and I
Yeah.
wonder, is that something
Who is
that
it?
you have experience with, or is that just a constant that people do that, and are they able to persist for years like
Oh,
without
yeah.
actually providing the information or the proof?
Yeah. No, there's a whole group of them, and they call themselves the Invisible College. And this it's kind of a historical term, but it was kind of coined, I believe, by Jacques Vallée, who's a big UFO guy, French UFO guy. Lives in America now. But the Invisible College is basically a bunch of people in academia and in other institutions, including the Pentagon, who believe that aliens are here, and they're doing stuff to try to promote disclosure. They're trying to work behind the scenes to make the government admit what they know about UFOs, and they've been doing this for at least 20 years or so, and probably longer. Start with Jacques Vallée, and there was a whole bunch of other people at the time. Some of them are deceased, and then there's kind of a new generation of people coming in and being mentored by the old generation. Jacques Vallée has a guy called Gary Nolan, who is this Stanford scientist. He's a kind of a neurobiology geneticist type guy, very accomplished in his field, but he's also very into UFOs. And he's part of the Invisible College. He's one of the people who's behind Dave Grush. He's one of the people who's basically been going around with Dave Grush and introducing him to people and saying, this is the whistleblower who's going to tell us everything that we need to know about UFOs. And then there's other people, like there's journalist George Knapp, who's this guy who's behind Bob Lazar, who is this guy who's kind of similar in a way to Dave Grush, except he lacked all the credentials. He was the guy who's seen all these UFOs. He actually claims he actually saw them, unlike Grush. And George Knapp promoted this guy, and complete fraud, though, Bob Lazar. And he has a protege now, like Jeremy Corbell, who's doing similar types of things. He's the guy behind the Green Triangle video. So there's this kind of almost like a generational group of people like trying to do this stuff, and I think they've been approaching people, and people have described it as grooming, which the term is kind of acquired very negative meanings now, so you can't really use it. But they're kind of like training these people and courting their attention, and then kind of building them up to do certain things, like to you use their position. So they approach people like Sam Harris, and they sound great because they're people who are they've got credentials. There's people like Hal Puthoff, who's a guy who's a physicist who's done work for the government, but he's also done work on telepathy, and he was a big fan of Uri Geller. You get someone like him, and there's a guy called Kit Green, who's I think a doctor who's studied the brains of people who had UFO encounters, and he's worked with Gary Nolan. They're all kind of together in this Invisible College. So they approach someone like Sam Harris. Sam Harris is like, oh, this guy who from the CIA. Kit Green is CIA, I think. It might be someone else. There's a bunch of different people. CIA is approaching me, and they're telling me things, and they're promising that I'm going to get to see this evidence. But Sam Harris isn't stupid, so is. He figured it out. Figured out that got to get some actual real evidence, and he's kind of demanding the actual real evidence. And they're like, "Oh, we'll take you to see the evidence," and then they don't take him because it doesn't really exist. And then he's like, "This is bullshit." And eventually he becomes disillusioned. And then he watches some of my videos. He cited that at one point in one of his interviews that he watched my videos and found them reasonably compelling to explain the other videos. And now he's like, that was just nonsense. Eric, the same. I think he uses the analogy of, I don't know if you'll know Charlie Brown and Lucy. There's this famous scene in Peanuts where Lucy has a football and Charlie Brown is running up to kick it and Lucy pulls it away. And she's been doing this forever. She's been doing this for 60 years. And he hasn't figured it out yet. And there are a lot of people who still haven't figured it out. Sam Harris and Eric Weinstein have figured out that that's Lucy over there, and she's promising you a football to kick, but when you run up to kick it, she's going to pull it away.
Yes, I remember.
So they've been turned away, but lots of other people are lining up to kick that football.
Yes, I remember Eric citing that story from years back. So I think it took him a while to figure out that it was Lucy, but anyway.
Yeah, it is interesting, and the point you made about people having proteges, we've observed amongst the kind of gurus that we cover. It's not all of them. It kind of, and we cover a range of people. The same as you. I'm sure, Mick, that there are various people that we've looked at who are, relatively normal people, and they're not necessarily doing terrible harm. They're just, they have particular interests. And so I'm not trying to say that this applies to all of them, but some of them, they do encourage these kind of devotional communities and this very strong in-group out-group dynamic whereby the people in the in-group are the truth seekers and the people outside are part of a distributed idea suppression complex, for example. And then those networks are quite good at generating what we've referred to as like kind of minor gurus or satellite gurus. They're kind of followers who are very defensive of their selected guru, but they gain an independent kind of following. And then they become, some of them, they don't, get that big. Other ones completely spin out and get their own platform. And I observed in some of the more extreme conspiratorial content I consume, like Alex Jones, that he was grooming, in a sense, Paul Joseph Watson to be his replacement, but that as subsequently Paul Joseph Watson kind of became big on his own and doesn't seem to be fulfilling that role. So yeah, I wonder if that dynamic is something that the personality type that seeks to be a guru or believes that they have secret insight cultivates.
Yeah, I think with the UFO culture, there are like a number of people that are these like big wigs that people look up to, like Lou Elizondo. And there's a bunch of people who are his acolytes, like people who are like big fans of him, and they kind of get a bit of a following because they kind of have access to this person. This person will respond to their tweets and things like that. So you get like you get a bit of the fame by association. Like if a typical UFO fan in this culture, this kind of like this subculture, not all UFO enthusiasts are really into this current group of invisible college people, but someone who really is. And if Lou Elizondo was to follow them on Twitter, they're like, oh my god, it's like a superstar has followed me. They think this super famous person, someone who they've seen him on TV and stuff like that. But yeah, there is this kind of secondary and tertiary tier of different people, and lots of people with podcasts, and then people,
The worst
like
people.
you say, they will they will probably move away. I mean, at the moment, it's kind of pretty close knit because everyone's focusing on these few things. And Lou Elizondo has been promising stuff is going to happen for a while, and now it is. Lou's still very much in the mix. Elizondo, he was the guy who's revealed by the original Leslie Kean story back in 2018, 2017. But he kind of like has stepped back a little bit, and other people are kind of taking the front, and things are going on behind the scenes. Now you've got like Gary Nolan is stepping up, and Ross Coulthart, the Australian guy, and various other people. And then there's these younger kids. This guy called Chris Sharp, who has a blog called the Liberation Times, which is basically just kind of an invisible college mouthpiece, and he writes things for the Daily Mail sometimes. And there's another guy at the Daily Mail who's pretty friendly with him, and they write things about UFOs together, kind of promoting the narrative. And these are younger guys, like 30 or so. So there's these generations of people like doing this, looking up to the older generations, and then the mentoring, and then the passing on, and then the like you said earlier, there's this idea of kind of othering people and excluding them. Gary Nolan has told all his followers that they should all ignore me, and this has become a bit of a narrative in the UFO community, which is in dispute. Not everyone thinks they should ignore me, but like everyone's like, Gary said we should ignore him, and it's like, well, why were you even talking about him then? Let's don't say anything. Like, so people are trying to ignore me when they talk about work that I do. They don't mention me by name on TV. They will say like, some debunkers think that this is just a camera artifact, but they don't have PhDs, and they won't mention me by name.
He who should not be named.
Yeah, names have power.
Yes. So you've not only looked at UFO stuff, but going back, you had an interest in flat earthers and chemtrails and stuff, and I shared those interests with you, by the way. I was a bit fascinated by those communities, not to mock or ridicule them, but rather just that I was fascinated by why they believed the things they did, and it was very interesting to have one-on-one virtual conversations with them. But what I wanted to ask you was, like, there's clearly an awful lot of overlap in terms of the conspiratorial nature of these sort of belief systems, and there's an awful lot of overlap in terms of motivations and the psychology. But I wonder, can you think of anything that is unique to the people that are fans of UFOs? Like, what makes them, if anything, distinct and special from other kinds of conspiratorial beliefs?
Well, it's really that the UFO culture is, to a very large extent, based on personal experience and not just believing something that you've read. A huge portion of people who are deep into this UFO stuff are people who claim to have had some kind of experience with the UFO. Like Gary Nolan had, when he was a child, he had like small beings visit him in his bedroom, and later like saw a UFO fly over his head when he was delivering papers. And even later than that, as a young man, he had an experience with some kind of entity talking to him in a hotel room. So if you have someone who has a deep personal experience that they think was very significant to them, it really makes a huge difference in how they interpret like these ideas and the framework that's presented to them, and they find it very attractive. The idea that UFOs are some kind of advanced technology, some kind of higher non-human intelligence, because it explains their experience, and they love the idea that their experience becomes validated, which you don't really have that with like flat earthers. They have the idea that the earth is flat. They're sure they personally can see it kind of looks like it's flat, but they're seeing the exact same thing that everybody else is seeing every day. They're not having this unique experience that UFO people have. And people who are interested in JFK, it's just purely historical. Nothing's going to change. Chemtrails, it's just again, you're seeing the same things that other people are seeing. It's not unique. So the unique nature of the personal experience is what makes UFO culture this very specific thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Sorry, Chris, but I just wanted to ask Mick, I mean, because it seems like there's a personal revelatory and spiritual aspect to part of it. And you reminded me of that fella Mike Cleland. I'm sure you're probably aware of him. He wrote The
Oh, I don't.
Messages, Owls, Synchronicity, and
No, I don't.
UFO.
I don't know. I
Oh, oh, you're in for a treat. I
the
encourage you to look into
I'm familiar
him.
with owls. Did you say owls?
Owls, yeah, Synchronicity and
Yeah.
owls. So people, owls are basically a trans-dimensional smokescreen for aliens. In a nutshell, I'm simplifying it a bit.
So like, birds are not real, but more specifically to UFOs and
Ye-
owls.
Owls, yeah.
Yeah, well, owls do look very alien. If you ever seen a little baby owl standing up, they look decidedly alien. And they also
I,
explain a few alien encounter cases because they've got their big eyes and they can look like they're aliens in low light, and then they have their claws reaching out towards you.
Yeah,
yeah, it was a. Sorry, go on, Chris.
no, go ahead. I shouldn't interrupt the all. It's important.
I will link people up to the a lecture given by Mike Cleland
Okay.
in the notes, and he's actually an extraordinarily well spoken person. He comes across as a very nice
Mm.
person, actually, and he describes his research into this phenomenon, and he had the suspicion about owls and synchronicity, which is like
Mm.
seeing strange things like the letter three times or something like that, and then seeing an owl, and these weird coincidences. So he put it to
Yeah.
research it. He put out a call on the various websites for people to send in describing this phenomena and asking people to send in if check with whether they'd had similar types of experiences, and he got a torrent. And he
Yeah, well, he
compiled
would.
all of this evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just very telling in terms of just the epistemics of it, just how
Yeah.
yeah.
It's casting a very large but very loose net. You're going to catch a bunch of specific fish. It's like you put out the word for a certain type of coincidence. It's like you put out a call. Have you ever thought about a person and the phone rang and it was that person?
Yeah.
You're going to get a lot of responses because that's something that just happens to people. And if you just filter it down to this is something in all these conspiracy theories. There's a lot of taking the cream of the crop, especially with UFOs. It's like random things are going to happen, coincidences are going to happen. Some of those coincidences are going to be more interesting coincidences than others. And if you just, you got all these coincidences, some of them are low level coincidences, some are medium level coincidences, some are like super high, some of them like amazing coincidences. You just like draw a line somewhere about the 99% level, take the few coincidences that are way up at the top, and it's like miracles. That's how miracles happen.
Yeah.
These are the most amazing things that ever happened. So if you filter out the amazing stuff, you get amazing stuff. But because amazing stuff is inevitable, someone's going to win the lottery. And if someone thinks, I'm going to play these numbers, and then they win the lottery, it's a miracle. But it's not. Someone's going to win. It's going to happen to somebody. So it's something that it's. I mean, I'm sure there's a psychological term for it, but it's like interpreting a coincidence as having special significance when really it's just something that is actually inevitable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's very well understood. Chris and I have talked about this, and I won't distract people from it now. But yes, it is quite interesting that there are good psychological reasons for having this trigger finger on the
Yeah.
interpretation and over extrapolating from events. But that's a discussion for another day. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fun
Yeah.
topic though. I wrote an article on I don't know if you know the game show Jeopardy. It's just a quiz show in America. Like it's my wife and I watch it every day, and we started noticing that there were these strange coincidences between things on the show and things that would happen during the day. So I actually did the math on what are the likelihoods of these coincidences actually happening. So I did some simple analysis of it. You get so many things you talk about during the day and so many clues on the thing. And there's going to be some overlap at some point. And approximately, I think it was once every 200 shows, you're going to get a really amazing coincidence, like, you know, 1 in a million coincidence. It seems like 1 in a million, but it's actually much more likely because there's so many things that can possibly overlap.
Yeah.
And it played out. Like I see the same frequencies that I calculated. So we occasionally get these awesome coincidences. My wife and I will be talking about, you know, what's the Spanish for chicken and rice, and then the same day that was a question on Jeopardy.
Mm.
Yeah.
It took a year for that something else like that to happen, but that comes up all the time. When, you know, like in
Mm.
in UFOs, I say, well, perhaps, you know, it was just a coincidence that, you know, they went to this spot that on the radar and then they saw this thing, and they say, no, that's impossible. There's no way it could be a coincidence. That's just so unlikely. But at some point, an amazing coincidence is going to happen to a fighter pilot, and he's going to misinterpret it as a UFO. It's
Yeah.
inevitable.
Yeah, people
Yeah.
are just terrible at, including myself. Everybody. I do a
Yeah.
lot of work in statistics, but it doesn't make my intuitions necessarily any better. And you know, I think have you heard of that that little mathematical thing where if you have a room of, I forget the numbers, it could be 30
The
people or
birthday
50 people.
paradox.
The birthday paradox. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same math actually that I used for the Jeopardy thing, because it's two intersecting groups,
Yeah.
essentially, and like, you know, what the odds that one will intersect with the other. I mean, it's really a set intersecting with itself, but it's the same type of thing. You don't. It's hard to constantly miss. Eventually, you're going to get a hit, but people think that it seems like, you know, very odd. It's like 1 in 30, the chance of two people in a room. If you have 30 people, you've got an even chance of them having the same birthday. But it seems like, oh my god, you have the same birthday as me. What are the odds?
What are the odds? Yeah.
They're pretty good.
There's yeah, you mentioned before, Mick, about flashbulb memories, and actually I do research on like transformative rituals that people go through, and flashbulb memories are part of that. But like you indicated, uh the initial research was suggesting people have these very good memories, accurate memories for those kind of emotional events, but subsequently emerged that they just have very strong attachments, and often these events are very core to their identity, so they're often very important memories for autobiographical identity, but not more accurate than, you know, any other memory. And so the when you were describing that, you know, one of the features of the UFO community is that they often have personal experiences, it does feel that that lays the groundwork for people undermining or presenting alternative naturalistic explanations to to evoke an emotional reaction, because you're undermining a core part of someone's personal autobiographical identity, right?
Yeah,
And if you
yeah,
do that, it's not just a discussion about the facts or particular interpretations of memory. It's more like challenging someone's self-identity. And I wonder, because of that, um the reaction that you get from the UFO community. So you mentioned, you know, some people don't want to invoke your name or that kind of thing, but I wonder, do you experience like stronger, more hostility from that community notably, or is it, you know, much of a muchness if you're talking with contrails and flat
yeah.
earthers as well?
No, you definitely do. You get as much more blowback, I guess, from people who believe in UFOs. I was very surprised when I first started, you know, investigating UFOs, that people would be much, you know, significantly, like 2 or 3 times more, if I was to put numbers on it, reactive. I got, like, you know, the first kind of hate mail that I'd really got, like people sending me, like, you know, pornographic photos and things like that, which never happened before. And it was a surprise to me. And, you know, it wasn't until someone else pointed out that these people had these personal experiences that I really understood what that was. But yeah, I definitely noticed it. It's definitely something I still notice, that, you know, people like, you know, if someone believes in, you know, 9/11 conspiracies, they know that that's generally not believed by other people, and they're kind of all right with it, because they know that it's you know, it's just something that's outside of society. But when you're it's actually something they personally experienced, I think it just becomes so much more personal when someone offers a rebuttal of something adjacent to what they believed, or if you even, if you have the temerity to actually suggest something about their experience, they'll tell you that, I've gone over this 1,000 times in my mind, and there's no doubt in my mind what I saw, and they have these super clear memories. But we know from research that false memories can be just as vivid as real memories. They seem just as vivid and just as significant, and you can replay them in your mind in exactly the same way. And I don't know to what degree that's happened with these people, and I always try to stay away from it now. I don't even go there and say maybe you got a false memory, because they're going to be no. There is absolutely no doubt whatsoever about what happened. I remember exactly what happened, where I was, who I was with, what I looked up, and what this big flying triangle actually did, and it stayed with me ever since. And there's not a lot you can do with something like that.
Yeah, a couple. I mean, I think that's a really important point, and a point of distinction, because for many conspiracy theorists, the uniqueness, the fact that they're not commonly shared in the general population, and that they're not believed, kind of makes them feel a bit superior, right? They're the goats and you're the sheep, and it's been identified as one of the psychological rewards associated with conspiratorial belief. But that's a bit different when you're talking about a very personal, even spiritual, transformational experience, which is a key part of your identity. And then for someone to be denying that is a very different thing.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and it's the person. In some ways, it's almost like they're kind of marginalized, because it's this very small thing that only they experience. So they're not really in this group of people who have discovered the truth about the world. They've got that as well, in that they're part of the UFO culture, but they've got their own experience, which only they, not even the other people in the UFO community, can share. Some of them will seek out groups of people who have had similar experiences, and you get these very very self-reinforcing groups of people who do not question what anybody said. So you can go into one of these groups, and you can say, a giant a giant ape came into my room last night, and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's just the type of manifestation of an unhuman intelligence, like projecting a certain type of reality into your brain. And that's the type of thing that happened to me like that. It wasn't an ape, it was it was an alien. And they will come up with something that will explain the experience and fit it into this framework. But it's all these individual people, and that they're seeking validation for their individual experiences. So it kind of ends up with this huge melange of different types of things, and you have to really jump through some incredible hoops. I mean, there's really kind of a one overarching explanation that they've ended up coming with, and this was something that Jacques Vallée, who I mentioned earlier, came up with, which is that these experiences aren't real experiences. This is something that the non-human intelligence is projecting a reality to you, and this reality can even differ between different people who were in the room when it happened, or in the car when it happened. So different people will have different experiences, which normally when different people have different experiences, that generally means that their accounts are unreliable. But in UFO culture, in some aspects of UFO culture, different people having different experiences makes it more reliable, because that's an element of what they think is going on. They think that people are having essentially hallucinations of UFOs projected into their brains. But of course, on top of that, there's also real UFOs as well. So you get everything blended together in this explanation of everything, which really explains nothing.
Yeah, this really came through quite strongly as a theme, actually, in that recent discussion with Eric, because he kept coming back to that point that it also actually almost had like a social justice kind of flavor to it, which is that you should respect their individual subjective experience, and to deny that, to deny their lived experience is harmful and a form of aggression.
Yeah, it's a
on your
problem.
part.
It is like, and this is something that Jacques Vallée is the prime mover in this way of dealing with people. Is that he has a witness comes forward, they tell the story, and you assume that their story is entirely accurate, and then you try to figure out what happened. And really, the only way you can do it is this new theory. Well, not new; it's been around forever. This theory of projected reality. And so then you've got to try to figure out what's projecting this reality. And the whole thing with just aliens in spaceships isn't really satisfactory. And so they've come up with it being beings from another dimension. And these are like essentially transdimensional tricksters who are using this kind of reality projection thing with UFOs to do things. But it's really just that's all they could come up with. That isn't the what they've discovered by careful analysis. It's just if you're going to believe everything that everybody says and everyone's saying different things, then individual realities is the only way you can explain it. When of course it's just a big excuse.
Tricksters could be oils. I'm just throwing that out
You
there
never
for
know.
the trans-dimensional tricksters. That seems
But
possible.
but it is interesting, isn't it? Like I don't want to compare it to like schizophrenia or something or pathologize it, but it's like a Philip K.
Yeah.
Dick. It's like when things are approaching a Philip K. Dick novel, right?
Yeah.
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 But the
It's
yeah.
no. It's like it's a fantasy that it's a weird way of looking at the world. That if you kind of throw out all kind of objective reality, really, and you're saying we'll live in some kind of projected reality, and what can you do? Like, can you actually trust anything? You get into some of the more esoteric aspects of this, and people are doing experiments in psychic powers, and they say, I read this one experiment. It's kind of related to this thing, but it was an experiment on intentionally enhanced chocolate. So they got these bars of chocolate, and they had like a control sample they did nothing to. A guru prayed over one. They had a machine that prayed over another one, and then they had another one which had some kind of computer did something to it. I don't know. They waved some sage over it or something, and then they measured like what people felt after taking all of these, and they found the ones that were intentionally enhanced in some way, like made people a little bit happier than the control sample. But in the paper, they said use caution here, because if skeptics read this paper, I'm kind of paraphrasing here. If skeptics read this paper in the future, then their negative intentions may travel back in time and alter the results. Which is just it's like you're coming up with excuses
Better not
for
look at the data
everything.
sets.
Yeah, I mean, it's just ultimate magic. Beings from another dimension projecting a reality to people, or like time traveling negative intentions changing test results. It's a lot of excuses and not a lot of reality.
Yeah, and I think psychology has a lot of experience with such things because of the influence of Darrell Williams' Feeling the Future article, which posited retroactive causality,
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
could do the stimulus and get the result afterwards. And as a result, we had served as a potent impetus for the replication crisis. So it did have some positive aspects. Those kind of approaches. At least he did not go so far as to say, if you look at my data, you might retroactively change it so it looks like it's less impressive.
yeah.
That he should have. That's a good one. But yeah, no, Mick, we've took up a lot of your time this evening, but it's been an absolute pleasure, and I I could continue harassing you for UFO stories and tales of intergalactic oils or other transdimensional tricksters. But where should people look if they want to see more of your content or investigations? Is there like a hub? There's your book, which we'll put in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
show
My
notes.
book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole. New edition's coming out June 20th, so hold off on buying it. Everybody who's going to buy it.
Wait.
uh, the my YouTube channel has a lot of my investigations of things like UFOs and a bunch of other stuff. If you dig down, there's loads and loads of videos there. But the investigations of the UFOs are front and center if you're interested in that. On Twitter, I'm at Mick West. Or YouTube, I'm at Mick West as well. And I have my site Metabunk, where you can dig down into a whole bunch of interesting things, or maybe even join in the conversation.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again, Mick. Great to meet you, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting conversation. I've enjoyed it.